This program, Campaign Against Violent Extremism, is an initiative on behalf of the Muslim community in partnership with law enforcement and government representatives for a couple of reasons. The fact that we are Muslims also necessarily implies that we have a respect for systems, for peace, and we have a sense of discipline. The Quran forbids disruption of peaceful systems. The Quran announces God does not like disruption. Wallahu la yuhibbul fasad. And the Quran also says that God does not like those, He does not love those who cause disruption. And the Quran has also mentioned some very stringent and very strict punishments for those who disrupt an otherwise peaceful system. So on one side, it is the integrity of Islamic teachings that is at stake. When you have groups that are affiliated with the religion, but are carrying out acts that go against the very essence of the religion, it is a problem for all of us. The second thing is that as Canadian citizens, we all have a role. As the sergeant very aptly put it, we all have a duty and a responsibility to maintaining a peaceful and a safe environment in the country that we have chosen to live in. And it cannot be left entirely up to law enforcement agencies to ensure that our neighborhoods and our homes, our families, our communities are safe. Safety is the result of a great deal of effort carried out by every sector and segment of society. You can have the best and most advanced and well-trained law enforcement agencies in the world at your disposal. But if the people refuse to allow safety and stability to remain, even those law enforcement agencies cannot succeed. So you heard a little bit about the background of this campaign, and you got a very precise perspective from the law enforcement agencies of how they are looking at it. I would like to share with you some thoughts about how I look at it and how mainstream Islam looks at it. Islam does not see itself as a religion introduced by a prophet named Muhammad in the 7th century. Islam sees itself as a continuation of the teachings that were conveyed by hundreds or thousands of prophets, many of whom are mentioned in the Torah, in the Bible, in the Psalms. These are prophets that we believe were true messengers of God. The messages they conveyed were in fact the message of God. The books and scriptures that were revealed to them and they conveyed were in fact revealed by God. Anyone who denounces any one of these elements cannot be a Muslim. In fact, the Quran opens up, when it talks about beliefs, right in the beginning, it talks about people, only those people will gain guidance from the Quran who believe in that which was revealed to Muhammad, peace be upon him, and that which was revealed to the prophets before him, peace be upon them. So this is not, we don't view it as a new religion. We view it as the religion that has always been around. It has changed shapes. Its applications have changed. It was applied in a different way in the time of Moses. It was applied in a somewhat different way in the time of Jesus. It was applied before that. Abraham has been called our father in the Quran. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, refers to him as his father. He refers to the other prophets as his brothers. So Islam is the culmination of the teachings of this brotherhood or family of prophets. Now, the teachings of Islam are grounded in text. Islam does not promote teachings that are the result of mere contemplation or human logic. And as such, it does not permit modifications to the religion based on human logic. We believe that if something has come from God, and we believe in that God to be the absolute authority, the all-knowing, the all-wise, then His teachings apply to us, and they apply not for a limited time, they apply for all time. Because God is aware of what is happening now and what will happen in the future. And we believe that the teachings He has given are complete and comprehensive. And so we don't allow modifications. Because if we were to take religion into our own hands and design it with our own minds, then it would be the product of our minds and not something that has been revealed by God. So it becomes necessary for the Muslim to turn to those texts for teachings that apply to all facets of life. And Islam does have teachings that pertain to every single aspect of life, at every level of human life, at the individual, family, community, national and international level. I was here yesterday talking about the different dimensions of human existence and how Islamic teachings are geared towards facilitating the needs of the human being throughout all of those dimensions, so that no aspect of the human being's existence is neglected. Whether it's the physical or the emotional, the psychological, the social, the financial, and anything in between, the spiritual. The teachings of Islam are geared, they're practical teachings geared towards these needs. And if any of those needs are neglected and left unfulfilled, it results in a state of unwellness. Like the doctors would say, homeostasis cannot be achieved. It is a state of imbalance. So, what do the texts say? The first text that we turn to is the Quran itself. The second text we turn to is the body, the corpus of teachings that have come from the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, themselves. Because Islam is very fortunate to have thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of prophetic teachings preserved as they were given by the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. So we have a lot of texts, we have a lot of material to take our religion from. It's not limited. In fact, those prophetic teachings are viewed as the commentary of the Quran. We see the Quran through this massive set of prophetic teachings. It helps us interpret the Quran. If the Quran was to be interpreted minus those teachings, you would have a completely different understanding of Islam. And what we are concerned with as mainstream Muslims is the interpretation or interpretations which have always been upheld by Muslims. It's not to counter someone's argument, textual argument, with a textual counter argument today because of today's need. No. We want to refer back to the teachings and beliefs, the approach that Muslims have been upholding for the last 1400 years. That's what mainstream Islam is. Yes, there are freestylers. They're freestylers. They will approach the texts in their own way and form their own conclusions. But like I say about these people or groups, is that the problem with freestylers is that you don't know really where they're coming from and where they're going. And if you want to freestyle, you could do it with any text, with any religion, and make it look like just about anything. So strange that for centuries, Muslims who have been living in so much peace and harmony with their non-Muslim neighbors are all of a sudden being portrayed as this intolerant breed of human being that just cannot put up with someone who is different. And that is the version of Islam that certain people are projecting today. For centuries, Muslims have lived as neighbors and friends of Buddhists, of Christians, of Jews, of Hindus. It's always been like that. And that begins with the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and his life. After declaring prophethood, he lived for 23 years. 13 of those years was in his hometown of Mecca, where he was born and raised, where he married and had children. And 10 of the remaining years, the 10 remaining years, were in a city called Medina, at that time known as Yathrib. The first 13 years of his life were very tough because he was introducing a concept that was completely bizarre and unheard of in that part of the world, and that was the concept of one single God. And this one plain concept, simple concept, drew so much opposition that he was immediately persecuted and attacked and ridiculed. A pariah was made out of him. Mecca, since the time of Abraham, was still the center of pilgrimage. The Arabs, by virtue of being Arab and being very proud about Abraham and having this structure, this Kaaba, the sacred mosque, they still carried on the pilgrimage. But even that pilgrimage, which was initially to commemorate Abraham and his sacrifices, it also became a celebration of their idols. That Kaaba itself in Mecca was surrounded by more than 300 idols that they used to worship as they were doing their thing. So it was unacceptable that this man stands up in front of 300 or 360 idols and says, no, there's only one real God. And he starts reiterating this message, the same message of Moses and Jesus, and the same message that was in those scriptures, to people that were unfamiliar with all of this, and B, not having ever read a book in his life, because he was unlettered. And it was so strange that even though the Prophet Abraham's son Isaac, whose son Jacob had 12 sons, and their families the families of those 12 sons prospered and grew into the 12 tribes of Bani Israel. And Israel is simply the other name for Jacob, for Yaqub. And within those families, hundreds of prophets emerged. Moses and Jesus and Solomon and David and Joshua and Jeremiah and Isaiah were all from that family. They were all from that bloodline. That's all happening in Syro-Palestine, in that part of the world. Abraham's other son Ismail, whom he left in Mecca, also had sons, and his progeny also grew into tribes and clans, and they populated that whole area, but there were no prophets. Until many centuries later, where this man Muhammad, peace be upon him, emerges and starts repeating the same message that was being conveyed by these other prophets in other parts of the world. But they didn't like it and they didn't accept it. How did he respond? If Islam was violent in nature, if it was inherently violent, then there is no better excuse for violence than self-defense. There's no better excuse. He started it. He hit me first. There is no better pretense for a violent act than that it was instigated and we had no choice. For the sake of our own protection, that's what we did. And we believe that God is very wise, and His wisdom knows no bounds. If at that time the Prophet, peace be upon him, had reacted or responded to this persecution and torture by raising his hand, it would have set a precedent for Muslims to come for centuries. But he didn't. And the Quran summarizes the directives given to the Muslims for that time in these words: Kuffu aydiyakum wa aqimus salah. Withhold your hands, restrain your hands, focus on prayer. And it seems like a very silly thing. It seems like a utopian idea. Oh, okay, we just keep continuing to get beat and punished and tormented. You just want us to pray? Like, what is this? Is there no practicality to this religion? You just want us to keep praying? But that's exactly what they did for 13 years. And in those 13 years, they were persecuted to the point that many of them were killed. They were tortured almost on a daily basis. Some were whipped. Some had heavy boulders placed on their chest, made to lie in the hot sands. Some were dragged on hot charcoal until the blood and fat of their own bodies extinguished the fire beneath those charcoals. Some were stretched between horses until their bodies were torn. And then there was a time when this small yet growing Muslim community was collectively punished by being boycotted in a small valley for 3 whole years. Call it a concentration camp of that time. No one is allowed to sell anything to them. No one is allowed to buy anything from them. And no one is allowed to bring them any sort of supply. They stayed there suffering with their children, with their women. They stayed there in this valley with no access to anything, under extreme cases of starvation. If there was a time for revolt, it was that time. So I ask you, how was Islam spreading? And why did it spread? There was no question of Muslims using force, forced conversions, they say. There was no question of it. The Muslims were the ones being pummeled and kicked around from pillar to post, but the religion keeps spreading. And when we look at the approach of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, to all of this, never once did he command someone to accept Islam. First of all, he couldn't. And secondly, he never used that approach. One of the people that stood by his side, who played the most significant role in the safety of the Prophet Muhammad himself and his family members was his uncle, his paternal uncle, whose name was Abu Talib. And this man said, "Oh people," he was very influential. He said, "People, leave my nephew alone." And because they respected him so much, they would just back off. Otherwise, they plotted over and over and over again to kill him, to kill the Prophet Muhammad. Abu Talib would say, "Hands off." Abu Talib never accepted Islam. Never was a Muslim. He lived a non-Muslim, he died as a non-Muslim. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, encouraged him and urged him, even on his deathbed. He said, "Please, uncle, it's just one statement. Just one statement. Say that you believe in one God." He said, "If I do, and people will think that I chickened out. People will think I got influenced by you. And I rejected the religion of my forefathers. And I don't want it to look like that." He didn't accept. But there is no such thing as force being used to change someone's heart. You can't use force to change someone's heart. You use force with someone, you're going to create a rebelliousness in them. You're going to create resistance in them. But Islam continues to spread. And at one point, a group of people from that city, Yathrib, come to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. I'm not going to go into the details of the persecution. Some of it is rather gory. Like when he goes to convey his message to the city of Ta'if, which is in that very small area known as Hijaz. How they treated him. They pelted him with stones. They beat him. They sent the street urchins after him. He bled and bled and bled. And how they treated him when he was praying, putting heavy things on his head so he couldn't raise his head, dumping filth on him, throwing thorns in his path. And it goes on and on. But this group comes at a time when all the Muslims, when all the Arabs are focused on the pilgrimage. And interestingly, what used to happen is this Prophet Muhammad used to talk to people at that time. He would use that occasion to preach. And at the same time, to stop him, there would be a counter propaganda on behalf of the Quraysh, the tribe, the ruling tribe of Mecca. They would have this campaign going on that don't listen to him, don't listen to him, don't listen to him. People would still listen to him and accept Islam. A group of people representing about a dozen clans of that city came and said, "Look, we have been locked in a state of perpetual infighting with our family feuds. And we are a whole bunch of tribes of indigenous Arabs with Jews living amongst us." There were 3 primary tribes of Jews living there in that city. And the Jews had partnered up with various Arab tribes and clans. And we've been fighting now for almost a century. And we keep killing people from the other side, and every time we do that, the other party retaliates and kills one of ours, and it just goes on and on. And we've been locked into this, and it seems like there's no end. But now we have suffered so many losses of life that this is ridiculous. And we have looked for solutions. We haven't found any. And we've looked for a person who can unite us and solve this problem. And we don't see anyone who could do that except for you. So we are requesting you to please come. You're living in a state of persecution here. We have a genuine need for you in our city. By your coming, peace could be established, lives could be saved. Please think about it. And in the meantime, send someone to us to teach us about your religion. We're interested in learning about it. So the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, sends one young man by the name of Mus'ab. And Mus'ab was one of the wealthiest people in Mecca. He was the wealthiest youngster. He had the most lavish and extravagant life. When he accepted Islam, his mother captured him and chained him to a pillar inside their house. Took away everything of his, all his privileges, and kept him and said that you're going to stay chained up here until you revert to the religion of your forefathers. One day he escaped, and the Prophet, peace be upon him, sent him to Medina. He's going to go and explain to you what Islam is. So this youngster goes and starts talking to people. And people understand it. It makes sense to them. They start accepting Islam. 1 year after that, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, migrates. And between this time, almost all the Muslims have already migrated. The instruction is given in the Quran that you need to migrate now. So they migrate. So what does he do when he gets there? One of the first things that he does is forms a constitution by which this city, which is in fact a state in its own right, will be governed. And the primary objectives laid out in that constitution were that all of the different faith-based and ethnic groups that live here must agree to live with one another in peace and harmony. At that time in Medina, there were the indigenous Arabs, there were Jews, there were Christians, and now there were Muslims. So you have this multicultural society. And what commitment did the Prophet Muhammad take from them? He didn't take a commitment that one day every one of you must accept Islam because you know what, I'm the de facto leader here and I demand you to accept Islam, and if you don't, that's it, off with your head. The whole idea was to create a system of harmonious coexistence where any faith, a person of any faith could live and interact and grow up and raise their children and just be a part of society. And that constitution laid out that this is for the benefit of this city. And all of us are obliged to protect this city. And we will not kill one another. Nor will we partner up ever with those elements that want to destroy the city. That will be considered an act of treason. It will be considered an act of treachery against all of us. And every individual will have the freedom to practice their faith. And no one will be obliged to have any faith, any particular faith. By now Islam has spread. And the numbers of the Muslims have increased substantially. Some of these people from the indigenous Arabs had, based on some vow or pledge, given their children over to the Jewish rabbis to raise. They used to have these vows that if such and such thing happens for me, I'm going to give my child. It was like an act of charity, that I'm going to give my child over to the monastery, and he's going to be educated, and he's going to be a religious person and serve in their synagogue or in their place. Now these people have accepted Islam. And they're saying, wait a minute, those are our children. We want them to become Muslim now. Well, you've given them over to the Jews, the Jewish rabbis and people are raising them and doing all of that. And now you want them, they're saying, no, they must become Muslim. So it was in response to this that the Quran revealed this verse, La ikraha fi ddin. There is no compulsion in religion. قَدْ تَبَيَّنَ الرُّشْدُ مِنَ الْغَيِّ. Guidance has become clear from misguidance. Now it's up to people to choose. The benefits and the harms of each way has become clear. Let people choose for themselves. The Quran repeatedly tells the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, that your job is just to remind. You are there to remind and to encourage. You are not there to enforce. لَسْتَ عَلَيْهِمْ بِمُصَيْطِرٍ. You are not there to impose yourself on people. وَمَا أَنْتَ عَلَيْهِمْ بِجَبَّارٍ. You are not there to force people to do things. It's not the temperament of the religion of God. So in these 10 years, there were people who committed acts of treason against the state of Medina, who partnered up with those same people back in Mecca and formed alliances with them so that they could come and attack Medina, and then, of course, as a result, they would end up becoming the rulers of Medina. And that happened many times. Each time, people banded together for the sake of protecting their state. In that constitution of Medina, it was also stipulated that should Medina come under attack, it is the obligation of everyone to protect their city. But should the Muslims engage in some kind of a conflict that was based on religion, and they were engaged in some sort of an armed combat that was based on religion, no non-Muslim would be asked to participate in that battle. It was strictly the Muslims' business. Now 6 years into Medina, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, leaves to go back to Mecca, his hometown, as a pilgrim. There are two types of pilgrimages. One is the major pilgrimage called Hajj, and there's a minor pilgrimage. The minor pilgrimage can be completed in less than a day, and it can be done in any part of the year. So they donned their pilgrim's clothes, which for the men is just 2 white sheets, and they depart. They're not armed. They have their sacrificial animals that they will sacrifice at the conclusion of this. And they traveled hundreds of kilometers from Medina all the way to Mecca. When they reach the outskirts of Mecca, they are stopped. The residents say, no, we're not going to let you go. They said, why? They said, because we just won't. And they said, look, we've come as pilgrims. And everyone has a right to go into that sacred place and do their worship. Since the time of Abraham, no one has ever been stopped to go there for worship. Why are you stopping us? They said, we just don't want to. So at that time, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, who had 1,400 Muslims with him, said, you know what? I'm going to offer you a truce. A ceasefire and a peace treaty. And if you abide by it, then we will live in peace. But and remember, these people of Mecca have already carried out numerous attacks in these 6 years. 3 major wars have been fought, all based on attacks on Mecca, attacks on Medina. And the Muslims have come out of those wars and they protected themselves. Says, I'm offering you a peace treaty. But this time, if you don't accept it, if you want war, then really you will get war. So think about it. They said, okay, fine. Let's draw up a peace treaty. So, in that peace treaty, there are discussions that take place. Now the Muslims, it's their habit, whenever they write a document, they begin that document with the words Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, in the name of God, the most beneficent, the most merciful. The Arabs of Mecca said, you know what, we know God, but we don't know this most beneficent, most merciful stuff. We don't agree with that. We don't agree with it. We won't allow it to be written. Even though these are attributes of God. They said, no. He said, okay, fine, write Bismikallahumma, in your name, O God. Now, the wording, the text of this document, the person on the Muslim side says that, okay, it should read that this is a pact between Muhammad, the messenger of God, and the people of Quraysh. They said, no. If we thought he was the messenger of God, we wouldn't be here doing this. We don't think he's the messenger of God. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, tells his cousin, who is the one drafting this document, strike it out. Strike out that part where it says Messenger of God. He said, I can't. No way, you are the Messenger of God. There's no doubt. There's no way I'm going to erase that. He said, erase it. He said, I'm sorry, I can't. He says, okay, show me where it's written. Remember, he couldn't read himself. He said, show me where are those words. He erased it with his own hands. It's not a small thing. Now the terms of the agreement. If any person from Mecca defects over to Medina, whether by accepting Islam or otherwise, the people of Medina, meaning the Muslims, will return him back to Mecca. But if someone from Medina defects over to Mecca, the Meccans will not send him back. Strange. One-sided. Now, as this is being drafted, a man is brought in shackles. Abu Jandal. He was arrested by the people of Mecca for trying to defect over to Medina. So the people that were writing this document with him say that, your first test. Let's see what you do with it. Now, any statesman or lawmaker could have said, well, you know what, we haven't signed on this thing yet. We're still drafting it. We haven't completed the document. We haven't signed off on it. It's not binding on anyone. But the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said no, he will be sent back. Now the man who had been arrested said, what? Oh, Muslims, I'm being sent back to these people after accepting Islam? How could that be? To be persecuted, to be tortured by these people? And the only thing the Prophet said in response to that is that we do not break our pledges and our treaties. Once we make a covenant, we abide by it. And so he was returned. In the meantime, the document continues. 10 years of ceasefire. The Muslims will still not be allowed to perform the pilgrimage this year. They will be allowed to come the next year and only stay for 3 days, after which they must evacuate Mecca. And the tribes in Arabia are free to join either side of this pact, either partner up with the Muslims or partner up with the non-Muslims. And no one will be obliged or forced. And anyone who attacks one of the members of any side will be considered to have attacked the other side themselves. In other words, if you attack the allies of the Muslims in this pact, it's as if you've attacked the Muslims also. If you attacked the people of Quraysh, the tribe of Quraysh from Mecca, or their partners, it's as if you've attacked the whole group. After this is completed, the Muslims go back. Dejectedly. The morale is at an all-time low. That we came here for worship, we were denied to see the house of God. We have to go back like this in humiliation. The Quran at that time gave a message that was very contrary to what was going on. There's a chapter in the Quran called the victory. The conquest. It was at this occasion when the Muslims were being told you have to go back that this chapter was revealed, in which God says, verily we have given you open conquest. And the Muslims are like, what? Conquest? What conquest? We're going back. We didn't get to enter the city. We didn't get to worship. And look at this one-sided treaty. What kind of conquest is this? So they're coming and asking the messenger, is it really a conquest? He says, yeah, you'll see. Now what happens when the Muslims go back? And they did come back the following year and perform that pilgrimage and stay for 3 days and go back. Within this period of 1 year, more people accepted Islam than had accepted in the last 6 years put together. And in the 13 years before that in Mecca. In 1 year, more people accepted Islam than in the 19 years prior to that combined. This was the open victory that the Quran was talking about. Because the Quran, when it talks about the help of God or it talks about victory and conquest, It defines it. It defines it. إِذَا جَاءَ نَصْرُ اللَّهِ وَالْفَتْحِ. When the help of God and conquest comes, what will you see? وَرَأَيْتَ النَّاسَ يَدْخُلُونَ فِي دِينِ اللَّهِ أَفْوَاجًا. The Quran doesn't define conquest by winning of lands, by being victorious over enemies, by subduing them, by establishing a state or governments, by attaining wealth or assets. It defines it by people coming into the fold of Islam. That is the conquest for Islam and for the Muslims. So it happened. Now, after this, the people of Quraysh went and attacked one of the allies of the Muslims. There was a tribe that was camping out in the wilderness. They were sleeping by some sort of a pond or a body of water. And these guys went, one group of the allies of Quraysh went and attacked this tribe and killed them in the middle of the night while they were sleeping. Now news reaches the Prophet in Medina, and he says, you know what? I'm giving you 3 options. This is to the people of Makkah. I'm giving you 3 options. Either you remove those people, that tribe that went against this treaty, you remove them from your side of the treaty and say, you know what, you broke it. The implications are against all of us. We cannot tolerate that. We are now removing you from our side of the treaty. Either you do that, or you pay the blood money for all of those innocent victims that were killed. Or you announce that you are now breaking and annulling this treaty. They said, you know what? We're breaking the treaty. We don't want it anymore. He said, okay, I'm coming. So with a group of 10,000 Muslims, he starts marching towards Mecca. And in this process, there are Meccans that are still coming to him, approaching him and accepting Islam. One of them, Abu Sufyan, happened to be the leader of many, many campaigns against the Muslims before. So someone suggested to the Prophet, peace be upon him, that the Arab leaders like to be honored. They like to be given special privileges. So give this man a privilege. He said, okay, when we go into Mecca, anyone that enters into your house is safe. Hands off. He cannot be harmed. So he goes to the Prophet and says, O Prophet of Allah, my house is very small, very limited. How many people could I possibly shelter in my house? He says, okay, anyone who goes into the mosque, the sacred mosque in Mecca, anyone who goes there is also safe. He said, well, the mosque is also limited. Mecca has a large population now. He said, you tell them that anyone who goes inside his house and closes his doors are not going to be touched. They're also safe. One of the leaders of the tribes that was marching with this army announces, these are people that are thinking of all of those years of persecution, all of those attacks on Medina after they had migrated. And he says, today we're going to butcher them. Imagine soldiers talking to one another. He says, today we're going to butcher these people. This message was conveyed to the Prophet that this man has said this. He immediately ordered that the banner he was carrying, the standard of his tribe, be taken away from him and given to his son. And he said, today is not the day of butchery. Today is the day we will show them how merciful we are. And like this, he enters into Mecca, and there are many, many people there. And he says, today I'm going to say to you what Joseph said to his brothers after they took him through that whole ordeal, that there is no reprimand for you today. Go, may Allah forgive you, may God forgive you.